Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into greenwashing.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
I love it.
Specifically, how companies, try to appear eco-friendly without actually making meaningful changes,
Right.
especially those hiding behind those, glossy sustainability reports.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're keen to learn how to spot these tactics, and thankfully, we've got a source here that breaks down 11 sneaky ways that companies try to pull the wool over our eyes.
It's more than just marketing fluff, you
Yeah.
know?
Wow.
Greenwashing can actually mislead consumers and investors and ultimately hinder the real progress we need on climate change.
Right, yeah, for sure.
Like, we need to be doing the real deal.
Okay, so before we dive into those 11 tactics, let's start with the basics.
Yeah.
Where should we even begin when we want to see if a company is truly walking the walk?
Well, a company's overall track record is a good place to start.
Okay.
Organizations like the UN,
Mm-hmm.
Climate Action 100 Plus.
Stand Earth and the Carbon Tracker Initiative all publish reports and rankings that can give you a sense of whether a company has a history of environmental responsibility
Oh, yeah?
or if they're known for well-cutting corners.
So a little background check
Yeah.
before we jump into the nitty-gritty.
Exactly.
And then I'm guessing their sustainability report is the next stop, right?
Absolutely.
Especially that section on greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes. And that's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
Because our source points out that companies often play games with how they report their emissions, particularly when it comes to what are called Scope 3 emissions.
Wait, Scope 3?
Yeah,
There's more than one scope.
right. There are three.
Okay.
Scope 1 covers the direct emissions from a company's operations.
Okay.
Think of the fuel they burn in their factories.
Got it.
Scope 2 includes the emissions from the electricity they buy.
Okay.
But Scope 3, this is where it gets tricky.
Uh-oh.
It covers all the indirect emissions from their entire value chain.
So that means emissions from their suppliers,
Yes.
transporting their products, even how customers use and dispose of them.
Exactly.
Different-
It's a much broader picture of their impact.
Yeah.
And it can be huge, GE.
Okay.
Our source says it can represent up to 90% of a company's total emissions.
Wow.
So it's quite convenient for companies to downplay or even completely omit Scope 3 from their reporting.
That's sneaky.
Yay.
So essentially,
Yeah.
they're hiding the true cost of their business.
Yeah.
And our source points out another tricky area, something called market-based versus location-based emissions accounting.
Right. Let's say a company buys renewable energy certificates, or RECs,
Okay.
to claim their electricity use is emission-free.
Oh,
Sounds good, right?
yeah.
But here's the catch.
Oh.
The actual power they're using might still come from fossil fuels.
So they're essentially buying their way out of actually using renewable energy.
That's one way to look at it.
Wow.
And scientists have criticized this practice because it doesn't necessarily lead to more renewable energy being generated.
It's more about making their numbers look better on paper.
Yeah.
The electricity grid is still primarily powered by fossil fuels.
Yeah, for sure.
What's fascinating is that this approach can actually discourage investment in truly clean energy sources.
Oh, wow. So it's really counterproductive. It's all smoke and mirrors. And our source also warns us about another common tactic, hiding crucial details in the fine print of those reports.
Absolutely.
You know, the stuff they hope we'll just skim over.
It's a classic greenwashing strategy.
Yeah,
They'll shout about their achievements in bold headlines,
right.
but bury any less flattering information deep in the footnotes.
Yeah.
It's all about creating a positive impression without revealing the full story.
Speaking of creating impressions, what about all these net zero pledges we keep hearing about?
Yeah.
It seems like every company is promising to reach net zero emissions by some future date.
Net zero pledges can be a positive step,
Okay.
but there's a lot of room for greenwashing here.
Right.
The UN has even issued warnings about this, emphasizing that targets should cover all greenhouse gases,
Okay.
not just carbon dioxide.
So if a company is heavily reliant on fossil fuels,
Yeah,
we should be looking for a specific methane reduction target, right?
exactly.
Okay.
Our source points out that industries like agriculture and fossil fuels, for example, have notoriously high methane emissions.
Right.
If a company in these sectors doesn't have a clear plan to tackle methane, that's a huge red flag.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about the timeline for reaching net zero?
Yeah.
A lot of companies seem to be setting vague targets for 2050 or even later.
That's a major concern.
Yeah.
What matters are the actions they're taking today.
Right.
Interim targets, especially for significant reductions by 2030,
Okay.
are crucial for holding companies accountable and making sure they're not just kicking the can down the road. The lack of clear near-term goals can be a telltale sign of greenwashing.
It's easy to make promises about the future, but what are they actually doing now? Our source also mentioned something called baseline manipulation.
Yeah, this tactic involves carefully selecting a baseline year for emissions reductions
Okay.
to make their progress look more impressive than it really is.
Oh, I see.
Right.
The source gave the example of a beverage company choosing a baseline year when their emissions were unusually low due to COVID-19 lockdowns.
Right.
Their 10% reduction might sound good, but it's actually based on a distorted starting point.
Exactly. To avoid being fooled, it's important to investigate that baseline year and compare it to the company's overall emissions trend.
Okay.
Are they consistently reducing emissions?
Yeah.
Or are they cherry-picking a specific year to tell a more flattering story?
It sounds like they're trying to trick us with fancy math.
Yeah, it's all about the numbers.
And our source also warns us about another deceptive metric, emissions intensity.
Right. Emissions intensity refers to the amount of emissions per unit of production.
Okay.
It can be misleading because a company might appear to be making progress while their overall emissions are still increasing.
I remember the example from the source, a car company that reduces the emissions per car, but they're actually selling more cars overall. So their total emissions are going up, even though their intensity is going down.
That's right. It's important to look at both the intensity and the absolute emissions to get a complete picture of a company's impact.
All right, so we've uncovered some pretty sneaky tactics so far.
Definitely.
Let's move on to another area where greenwashing is rampant, renewable energy targets.
Okay.
I mean, who doesn't love renewable energy?
Renewable energy is crucial for a sustainable future.
Yeah.
But the problem is that companies can be very vague about what they consider renewable.
Our source pointed out that some companies might include controversial sources like gas biomass or even hydrogen in their definition of renewable.
Yes.
Which is misleading, right?
Absolutely.
Like, come on.
Wind and solar power should form the foundation of any legitimate renewable energy target.
Okay.
And even then, it's crucial to dig deeper and ask how the company is actually sourcing that energy.
Are they investing in building new solar or wind farms?
Right.
Or are they just buying RECs again?
Right. And even power purchase agreements, or PPAs as they're called, can be misleading.
Okay.
Are these agreements truly driving the development of additional renewable energy capacity?
Right.
Or are they just a way to offset emissions on paper without making a real impact?
So it seems like we really need to scrutinize the details to understand what a company's renewable energy target actually means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not enough to simply accept their claims at face value.
Right.
We need to demand transparency and look for evidence of real, measurable actions.
Okay, let's talk about something that's become a bit of a hot potato in the sustainability world.
Okay.
Carbon offsets.
Yeah.
This is where companies try to compensate for their emissions by investing in projects that supposedly reduce emissions elsewhere.
Yes, that's the basic idea.
Yeah.
But carbon offsets have become increasingly controversial for several reasons.
Our source highlighted some of those criticisms,
Yeah.
including land use conflicts, questionable effectiveness, and even the risk of distracting from real emissions reductions.
Right, and there have been some shocking investigations into the effectiveness of offsets.
Oh, wow.
One study found that 90% of offsets from a leading certifier didn't actually deliver genuine emissions reductions.
90%?
Yeah.
That's a huge red flag.
It is.
It makes me wonder if companies are using offsets as a way to avoid making real changes to their operations.
It's certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
And our source points out some tricky terms that companies might use to disguise their reliance on offsets,
Okay.
like compensate, neutralize, balancing, or even insetting.
It sounds like they're trying to hide the fact that they're not actually reducing their own emissions.
Yeah.
So what are some key questions we should be asking when a company claims to be using offsets?
First ask,
Okay.
are they using offsets to compensate for emissions where low-carbon alternatives already exist?
Okay.
If a company could easily switch to renewable energy or more efficient technologies, they shouldn't be relying on offsets.
Oh, okay.
Right.
And are they being transparent about the specific offsetting projects they're investing in?
Right.
Are these projects actually delivering verifiable emissions reductions?
Yeah.
Because 90% failure rate from that study, that's scary.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
We need to see evidence that these projects are real, additional, and permanent.
Yeah, okay.
And ultimately, offsets should be a last resort after all other options for reducing their own emissions have been exhausted.
It makes me think about my own attempts to offset my carbon footprint.
Yeah.
Am I being greenwashed too?
Yeah.
It feels like companies are using offsets as a get-out-of-jail-free card.
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
We need to be critical of both our own actions and the claims made by companies.
Right.
Offsets can be a slippery slope if they're not used responsibly and transparently.
All right, so we've covered emissions reporting, net zero pledges, renewable energy targets, and even the thorny issue of carbon offsets. Let's move on to another trendy topic where greenwashing is running rampant hydrogen.
Okay.
It seems like everyone is touting hydrogen as the green fuel of the future, especially for things like cars and trucks.
There's definitely a lot of hype around hydrogen,
Yeah.
but it's essential to separate the hype from the reality.
I remember our source explaining that producing hydrogen actually requires a lot of electricity.
Yeah.
And if that electricity comes from fossil fuels, then it's not a clean fuel at all, is it?
Right.
And then there's the challenge of storing hydrogen, which is both difficult and expensive.
That's right. For most applications, direct electrification, like electric vehicles, is a much more practical and efficient solution.
So in many cases, hydrogen might be a distraction from the real solutions, which is a classic greenwashing tactic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about looking beyond the hype and understanding the true costs and benefits of different technologies.
Now let's delve into some even more futuristic technologies, carbon dioxide removal, or CDR,
Okay.
and geoengineering.
Wow.
These sound like something out of a sci-fi movie.
They do, don't they?
Yeah.
But these are real concepts being explored as potential solutions to climate change.
Yeah.
CDR involves capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it,
Yeah, okay.
while geoengineering aims to manipulate the Earth's systems to counteract the effects of global warming.
Our source explained that both of these are still in the very early stages of development,
Yeah.
and there are significant uncertainties about their effectiveness costs and even potential risks.
Exactly. And that's where the greenwashing comes in.
Uh-oh.
Some companies might be using these unproven technologies as a shield for their current emissions.
Right?
It's like saying, don't worry about our pollution today. We'll just invent some magic technology to fix it in the future.
It's a dangerous gamble, isn't it?
It is.
Relying on future technologies that might never materialize or might have unintended consequences.
It's crucial to be wary of companies that are over-reliant on these futuristic promises
Yeah.
without demonstrating a clear commitment to reducing their own emissions in the here and now.
Yeah, we need to see action.
Real action today is what counts,
Right.
not just vague hopes for future solutions.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
We need to hold companies accountable for their current actions, not their future aspirations.
Oh, sure.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about a tactic that's a bit closer to home, the gas guys.
Okay.
This is where companies try to pass off gas, whether it's called natural gas or fossil gas, as a clean alternative to coal.
Right. We've all seen the ads.
Yeah.
Natural gas is clean and abundant.
Yeah, totally.
But it's crucial to remember that gas is still a fossil fuel.
Hmm.
Burning it releases significant amounts of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere.
Our source debunked this myth quite effectively, reminding us that promoting gas as a clean transition fuel is simply greenwashing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a classic example of trying to rebrand a polluting industry without addressing the fundamental issue.
Right.
Our continued reliance on fossil fuels.
Okay, we've arrived at our final greenwashing tactic, the CCS conundrum. CCS stands for carbon capture and storage, which sounds like a pretty good idea in theory.
On the surface, it does sound promising.
Yeah, capturing carbon dioxide from industrial processes and storing it underground to prevent it from entering the atmosphere.
But CCS has been subject to a lot of criticism.
Okay.
And even the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called it a form of greenwashing.
Wow, that's quite a statement.
It is.
Why is CCS so controversial?
One reason is that it's incredibly expensive and energy intensive.
Okay.
There are also concerns about the long-term safety and effectiveness of storing carbon dioxide underground.
Right.
What if it leaks?
And our source pointed out that CCS can allow polluting industries to continue business as usual while claiming to be taking action on climate change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can create the illusion of progress without addressing the root cause of the problem,
Right.
which is our reliance on fossil fuels.
Yeah.
CCS could potentially be part of the solution in some cases.
Oh.
But it's crucial to examine whether it's being used as a genuine effort to reduce emissions or simply as a way to delay the transition to a truly clean energy future.
It seems like CCS could be a valuable tool, but only if it's used responsibly and in conjunction with other efforts to reduce emissions.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
it can't be a standalone solution or a way for companies to avoid making the hard choices about transitioning away from fossil fuels.
That's precisely the point.
Yeah,
We need to be wary of companies that are over-reliant on CCS as a way to justify their continued use of fossil fuels.
right.
It's about looking beyond the techno-fixes
Yeah.
and demanding real systemic change.
Right, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
11 sneaky greenwashing tactics designed to make companies appear more sustainable than they actually are.
Yeah,
It's a lot to take in.
it is.
But hopefully you're starting to see some of the patterns and understand how to approach these claims with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just the beginning. The more we understand about greenwashing, the better equipped we'll be to spot it and demand better from the companies we interact with.
It's like becoming a sustainability detective, right?
Exactly.
We're learning how to read the clues, decode the language, and see through the smoke and mirrors.
Exactly. And as we continue this deep dive, we'll explore some real-world examples of these tactics in action and discuss what you can do to hold companies accountable.
This is good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So we've uncovered the tricks, but how about seeing them in action?
Yeah, let's do it.
Can you give us some real-world examples of these greenwashing tactics?
Let's take the issue of Scope 3 emissions.
Okay.
Remember, that's where companies often try to hide the ball.
Right, the emissions from their supply chain and product use, all that behind-the-scenes stuff that can be hard to track.
Exactly. One common tactic is to cherry-pick which Scope 3 categories they report on,
Uh-huh.
conveniently leaving out the ones that would make their emissions look worse. Imagine a clothing company that reports the emissions from shipping their clothes,
Right,
but ignores the emissions from the factories that actually make them.
right.
That's not the whole picture, is it?
Oh, no, it's like showing you a pristine store while hiding the messy factory where everything is made.
But precisely.
Yeah.
It creates the illusion of responsibility without addressing the full impact of their business.
Right.
They might even claim to be sustainable based on the limited data they've chosen to share.
Okay, so what about those net zero pledges?
Yeah.
We talked about how companies need to have clear interim targets to show they're serious.
Right.
What are some red flags in that area?
Well, one common trick is to set a distant target, like 2050,
Okay.
without any specific milestones along the way.
Yeah.
It's like saying, we'll get there eventually, trust us,
Right.
without any accountability for how they'll actually achieve it.
It's a bit like promising to clean your room sometime without setting a specific date.
Exactly.
Easy to say, but does it actually happen?
Right. And remember the emissions intensity trap we discussed.
Yes.
A company might proudly announce a reduction in their emissions per product,
Uh-huh.
but they're quietly increasing production overall.
Oh, sneaky.
So their total emissions are actually going up despite this seemingly positive metric.
Right.
It's a distraction designed to make us focus on the wrong thing.
Like that car company example. Lower emissions per car.
Yeah,
But they're selling more cars than ever.
exactly.
It's all about the total impact, isn't it?
Precisely. And that's where critical thinking comes in.
Yeah.
We can't just accept these claims at face value.
Right.
We need to dig deeper and look at the whole picture.
Okay, let's talk about renewable energy targets.
Okay.
Those sound good on paper,
Yeah.
but how can we tell if a company is truly walking the walk when it comes to clean energy?
Remember those vague definitions of renewable we talked about?
Yes.
Companies try to sneak in things like gas or biomass,
Yeah.
which aren't truly renewable in the same way that wind and solar are.
Right. It's like claiming that burning wood is renewable because trees can be replanted.
Exactly.
Technically true, but it misses the point about clean energy, right?
Exactly. We need to be wary of those misleading definitions and look for companies that are prioritizing true renewables like wind and solar power.
Okay.
And even then, we need to dig deeper.
Okay.
Are they building new wind and solar farms?
Right.
Or are they just buying those renewable energy certificates, those RECs, to offset their emissions on paper?
And what about those power purchase agreements, the PPAs?
Yeah.
Those seem a bit more substantial than just buying RECs.
They can be, but it depends on the details.
Okay.
We need to ask, are these agreements truly driving the development of new renewable energy capacity?
Right.
Or are they just creative accounting to make their numbers look better without actually contributing to a cleaner grid?
It sounds like there are a lot of ways companies can manipulate these renewable energy claims.
It is.
What should we be looking for to ensure a company is genuinely transitioning to clean energy?
Look for transparency and concrete actions.
Okay.
Are they investing in new renewable energy projects?
Mm-hmm.
Are they advocating for policies that support renewable energy development?
Okay.
Do they have a clear roadmap for transitioning away from fossil fuels entirely?
So actions speak louder than words, as they say.
Exactly.
Okay, let's dive back into the world of carbon offsets.
Really?
You mentioned earlier that these can be a bit of a minefield.
Yeah.
How can we tell if a company is using offsets responsibly or if they're just a way to avoid making real changes?
One red flag is if they're using offsets to compensate for emissions where low-carbon alternatives already exist.
Okay.
For example, if a company could easily switch to renewable energy for their operations,
Right.
but they choose to offset those emissions instead,
Yeah.
that's a sign they might not be taking things seriously.
So offsets should be a last resort, not the first line of defense.
Yeah.
What are some other things to watch out for?
Transparency is key.
Okay.
Are they open about the specific offsetting projects they're investing in?
Right.
Are these projects actually delivering verifiable emissions reductions?
Yeah.
And are they investing in a diverse portfolio of projects to mitigate risk?
Right, because remember that study we talked about earlier, the one that found a 90% failure rate for some offset projects?
Yeah,
That's pretty alarming.
it is. And that's why it's crucial to scrutinize the details and demand evidence of real measurable impact.
Right.
Don't just take your word for it.
Yeah.
Look for independent verification and evidence that these projects are truly making a difference.
So it's about doing your homework, basically.
Yeah.
All right, what about those futuristic technologies we talked about earlier, carbon
Wow.
dioxide removal and geoengineering?
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a lot of potential for greenwashing in that space, given how uncertain these technologies are.
Absolutely. Companies might try to create the impression that these technologies are a silver bullet solution,
Mm-hmm.
allowing them to continue business as usual without making any immediate changes.
It's like saying, don't worry, we'll just invent our way out of this problem.
Exactly.
But the reality is we need real action today, not just promises about what might be possible someday.
Precisely, these technologies might have a role to play in the future,
Okay.
but they can't be an excuse for inaction today.
Right.
We need to be wary of companies that are over-reliant on these future promises
Yeah.
without demonstrating a clear commitment to reducing their own emissions in the here and now.
It's a bit like saying, I'm going to lose weight someday,
Yeah.
but then continuing to eat junk food and not exercise.
Right.
Intentions are good, but action is what matters.
Exactly. We need to focus on the concrete steps companies are taking today,
Yeah.
not the vague hopes they have for the future.
Speaking of misleading claims, let's revisit the gas guys.
Yeah.
What are some common ways companies try to convince us that gas is a clean energy source?
They often use terms like natural gas or clean-burning fuel
Right.
to make it sound environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
But remember, gas is still a fossil fuel.
Yeah.
Burning it releases significant amounts of greenhouse gases, just like coal and oil.
They also love to tout gas as a bridge fuel to a cleaner energy future.
Yeah.
But isn't that just kicking the can down the road?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
Investing in gas infrastructure locks us into decades of continued fossil fuel dependence.
Right.
It's not a bridge. It's a detour that takes us further away from our climate goals.
So if a company is heavily reliant on gas and promoting it as a clean solution, that's a big red flag.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's essential to be aware of these tactics and see through the marketing spin.
Okay, let's wrap up with the CCS conundrum.
Okay.
How can we tell if a company is genuinely using carbon capture and storage to reduce their impact, or if they're just using it as a greenwashing tactic?
One key question is, are they using CCS to compensate for emissions where low-carbon alternatives already exist?
Okay.
If a company could easily electrify their operations or switch to renewable energy,
Right.
but they choose to rely on CCS, instead, that's a sign they might not be committed to truly reducing their emissions.
So CCS should be a last resort, not a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Exactly. And we need to look at the specifics of their CCS program.
Okay.
Are they capturing a significant portion of their emissions? Where are they storing the captured carbon dioxide?
Right.
And are there risks of leakage?
Yeah.
We need to demand transparency and accountability to ensure that CCS is being used responsibly and effectively.
It sounds like CCS is a complex issue with a lot of potential for both positive impact and greenwashing.
It is.
We need to be vigilant and informed to ensure it's not being used as a crutch for a continued reliance on fossil fuels.
Absolutely. It's crucial to approach CCS with a critical eye
Mm-hmm.
and ensure it's part of a comprehensive strategy for decarbonization,
Right.
not just a way to mask ongoing emissions.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground today, exploring real-world examples of how companies try to greenwash their image.
Yeah, definitely.
It can be disheartening to see these tactics in action,
Yeah,
but hopefully you're feeling more equipped to spot them and demand better from the companies you interact with.
that's the goal. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And by understanding these tactics, we can start to hold companies accountable for their actions.
We spend a lot of time talking about how companies try to greenwash their image, but let's talk about what we can do about it.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
how can we actually push back against greenwashing and encourage real change?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And thankfully, our source provides some fantastic resources to help us become greenwashing detectives ourselves.
Perfect. Let's dive into those.
Okay.
Yeah.
One standout resource is the UN's Integrity Matters report,
Okay.
which outlines 10 very specific recommendations to prevent those net zero commitments from being undermined by false claims and greenwashing.
So this is a great resource for understanding the nuances of those pledges and how to separate genuine action from empty promises.
Absolutely. And for those interested in the fossil fuel industry, the Stop Funding Heat report is a must-read.
Okay.
It really exposes how these companies use PR and lobbying to delay climate action while appearing to be part of the solution.
It's amazing how much effort goes into creating that illusion of progress, isn't it?
It is. And for those interested in the fashion industry, stand. Earth's fossil-free fashion scorecard ranks brands based on their efforts to eliminate fossil fuels from their supply chains.
It's great that there are resources focused on specific industries because the challenges and solutions can be so different, right?
Absolutely. And if you're looking for a broader overview,
Okay.
Clean Energy Wire has a helpful guide
Mm-hmm.
that breaks down how to evaluate a company's net zero target in 7 clear steps.
Love it. 7 steps to becoming a net zero detective.
Exactly.
What else do we have?
Well, for the visual learners out there,
Yeah.
Planet Tracker's report, The Greenwashing Hydra, uses powerful imagery to illustrate the many faces of greenwashing.
Okay.
It really drives home the scale and complexity of the problem.
Wow. The greenwashing hydra.
Yeah,
I can already picture it, a multi-headed beast of misleading marketing and deceptive claims.
exactly. It
Okay.
really captures the essence of greenwashing and how it can be so difficult to pin down.
Okay, so we've got all these great resources to educate ourselves.
Yeah.
But what about concrete actions? What can we do in our daily lives to push back against greenwashing?
Well, start by paying close attention to the language companies use.
Okay.
Are they throwing around terms like eco-friendly and sustainable without any specific details or evidence?
It's all about looking for concrete actions and measurable outcomes, not just vague buzzwords.
What else?
Don't just rely on a company's website or marketing materials.
Okay.
Dig into those sustainability reports and look for the information they might be trying to downplay or omit.
Playing detective again.
Yes.
And what about those third-party certifications?
Yeah.
Do those offer any reassurance?
They can, but it's crucial to research the specific certification and understand what it really means.
Okay.
Not all certifications are created equal.
Right.
Some are much more rigorous and meaningful than others.
So it's about understanding the standards behind the label, not just taking it at face value.
Exactly, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
If you're unsure about a company's practices,
Right.
reach out to them directly.
Okay.
Ask for clarification and demand more transparency.
I love that. We have a right to know what companies are doing.
We do?
Holding them accountable starts with asking questions.
Yes.
What about social media? Can we use that to combat greenwashing?
Absolutely. Social media can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
You can share information about greenwashing,
Okay.
call out companies for misleading practices,
Mhm.
and amplify the voices of organizations working to promote corporate accountability.
It's about using our voices and our platforms to create a more informed and engaged public.
Exactly.
And of course, we can always vote with our wallets, right?
That's right. Support the companies that are genuinely committed to sustainability and avoid those that are just paying lip service.
Yeah.
Our consumer choices have a real impact, and we can use our purchasing power to drive change in the marketplace.
So it's about being informed, being critical, and making conscious choices.
Yeah.
Every little bit helps, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not about being perfect or making radical changes overnight.
Right.
It's about taking small steps in the right direction and using our collective power to create a more sustainable future.
This has been such an insightful deep dive.
It has been.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of greenwashing, but I'm feeling empowered knowing that we can all make a difference.
I agree. The more we know about greenwashing, the less effective it becomes.
Yeah.
By being informed and engaged, we can create a world where companies are held accountable for their actions and genuine sustainability becomes the norm.
I love that vision.
Me too.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of greenwashing.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've learned some valuable tools and strategies for navigating this complex landscape.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Remember, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.